10 years in his bloodstream and nobody saw it. Cody Hodgson, top 10 pick, CHL Player of the Year, the next captain of a Stanley Cup contender. By 26, retired. The fans called him soft. The coach called him an excuse maker. The Sabres called him lazy. None of them were looking at the right thing. A single gene was tearing his muscles apart, and the league wrote a verdict before anyone wrote a diagnosis. Before any of that, he was the safest pick in the 2008 draft. Hodgson didn't arrive in the NHL as a question mark. He arrived as one of the most decorated junior players Canada had produced in years.
From the Brampton Battalion, Cody Hodgson.
In 2008, he captained Canada to gold in the U18 World Championship and finished as the tournament's top scorer with 12 points in 7 games. 8 months later, he did it again at the World Juniors in Ottawa, leading the team in points on a roster that included Alex Pietrangelo, PK Subban, and John Tavares. Back in the OHL, his numbers somehow got louder. 92 points in 53 games for the Brampton Battalion. Red Tilson Trophy as the league's Player of the Year. The CHL Player of the Year is the highest honor in Canadian junior hockey. The William Hanley Trophy for being the most sportsmanlike player in the league. Opposing coaches voted him the smartest player in the Eastern Conference. This wasn't a project. This was the closest thing to a finished product an 18-year-old could be. So when Vancouver took him 10th overall, it wasn't a reach. The Canucks had a long, ugly history of burning their top picks. Mike Gillis had just taken over as general manager, and Hodgson was the first player he ever drafted. Gillis pointed to one trait above everything else: leadership. He was the highest drafted Canuck since Daniel and Henrik Sedin in 1999. The franchise was building around the Sedins. The plan was for Hodgson to grow up behind them and eventually take the wheel. The Canucks weren't just drafting a center. They were drafting the next stage of their organization. And under all of it, there was one thing nobody flagged: the cramps. Hodgson had been getting muscle cramps for as long as he could remember. Not the kind a teenager gets after a hard skate. The kind that comes back over and over in different muscles with no clear pattern. He was told what every athlete gets told: hydrate more, stretch better, push through it. Trainers didn't dig deeper. Doctors didn't run tests. He had no reason to think his own body was hiding something. Hockey is built to ignore signs like that. Complaining about a cramp is how you lose ice time, so he absorbed it and kept playing. Those cramps weren't a coincidence. They were the earliest visible symptoms of the condition that would eventually take his career apart. In the summer of 2009, he was training with the team's own development staff to get ready for his rookie year. Then, he hurt his back. It happened in July 2009 during dryland training in London, Ontario, run by Canucks Director of Player Development Dave Gagne. A twisting movement, sharp pain. The team's medical staff gave him a diagnosis. They told him it was a bulging disc. It wasn't. That diagnosis would stand for almost a full year. And during that year, every single thing the team did to fix his back was actively making the real injury worse. He tried to push through it at training camp. The pain shot down his leg. His skating, already the weakest part of his game, got slower. He played 6 preseason games hurt and was cut on September 29th, sent back to Brampton in the final round of roster decisions. He sought more opinions. A back specialist in Toronto, same conclusion. The Cleveland Clinic in Ohio found nerve damage in one leg the Canucks had missed and ruled him unfit to play for a month. But the disc diagnosis stuck. 3 sets of doctors were now telling him the same wrong answer. This is where it stopped being a medical story and started being a public one. In October 2009, with Hodgson hurt and seeking more tests, Canucks head coach Alain Vigneault gave a quote that followed Hodgson for the next decade. He suggested that Hodgson was looking for excuses after a poor camp, that he was trying to roll the blame in another direction. The team's own doctors had given him the wrong diagnosis. The treatment was making the injury worse, and the head coach went on record suggesting he was making it up. He missed the first 50 games of his OHL season. He missed the 2010 World Juniors entirely, a tournament he was supposed to headline. By the time he came back to the battalion in February 2010, he had been out of game action for the better part of a year. A few months later, an MRI finally showed what had actually happened. It wasn't a disc. It was a torn muscle. The original diagnosis had been wrong from day one. Mike Gillis confirmed the new diagnosis on Vancouver radio. The coach didn't apologize. Hodgson refused to train with Gagne the following summer. Reports of a rift leaked into the press. He was already getting labeled difficult, sensitive, hard to manage, for asking why his back wasn't healing. He came back. By 2011-12, as a rookie, he had 16 goals and 33 points in 63 games, NHL Rookie of the Month honors for January, and a spot in the All-Star Skills competition. By February, his teammates were taping a C onto his practice jersey as a joke about how locked in he looked. 3 weeks later, the Canucks traded him. If the team's doctors had been wrong about something as basic as a back injury, the question nobody in Vancouver was asking yet was a much bigger one. What else were they missing? February 27th, 2012. Minutes before the trade deadline, Vancouver shipped Hodgson and defenseman Alexander Sulzer to Buffalo for Zach Kassian and Marc-Andre Grignani. The deal was panned almost everywhere. Hodgson was coming off Rookie of the Month. Kassian was a 21-year-old winger known mostly for his size. National analysts agreed. The Canucks had traded skill for grit, weeks before a playoff run. The trade looked even worse a few months later when Vancouver was eliminated in 5 games by Los Angeles in the first round. They scored 8 goals in the entire series. In Buffalo, Hodgson finally got real ice time. The lockout-shortened 2012-13 season was his breakout. 15 goals, 19 assists, 34 points in 48 games. Second among Sabres forwards in scoring. Buffalo signed him to a 6-year, $25.5 million contract extension on September 11th, 2013. The next year was the best of his career. 20 goals, 24 assists, 44 points in 72 games as the Sabres' top-line center on a team that finished dead last in the league. Then, 2014-15 happened. 6 goals, 7 assists, 13 points in 78 games. A -39. He went on a 47-game stretch with 1 goal. The Buffalo media stopped asking what was wrong with the team and started asking what was wrong with him. The word that kept appearing in coverage was lazy. His underlying possession numbers were among the worst on the roster. The Sabres bought him out on June 29, 2015, at a quarter of the contract's remaining value. What nobody yet understood was that something had started happening inside his body that no skating drill was going to fix. He signed a 1-year, $1.05 million deal with Nashville on July 1st, 2015. He made the opening night roster on the 4th line. Then, the symptoms stopped being something he could play through. His muscles were locking up. His heart rhythm was going wrong on the ice. He couldn't catch his breath during shifts. He was losing his vision and senses for stretches at a time, what doctors call syncope and what he called blacking out. His urine had turned the color of tea. Blood work showed his liver and kidney numbers had gone abnormal. He was hospitalized in late 2015. By January 13th, 2016, he was on waivers. He cleared and was assigned to Milwaukee the next day. The doctors didn't know what they were looking at, so they started ruling things out. They tested him for brain cancer, liver cancer, lung cancer. Every result came back negative. A 25-year-old NHL forward was sitting in front of them with damaged organs, an irregular heartbeat, and tea-colored urine, and the entire diagnostic playbook had come back blank. The condition tearing him apart wasn't on any list they had thought to check. The breakthrough came from one referral. During the 2015-16 season, Hodgson was sent to Dr. Sheila Riazzi, an anesthesiologist at Toronto General Hospital and one of the world's leading specialists on a rare muscle disorder called malignant hyperthermia. She also sat on the scientific advisory board of the RYR1 Foundation. Most patients she saw had nearly died on an operating table. Riazzi did something none of the previous doctors had done. She looked at the entire history at once. the lifelong cramps, the back injury that wouldn't heal, the muscles that tore during ordinary movements, the collapse in Buffalo, the blackouts, the tea-colored urine, the damaged organs. She ordered a genetic test and a muscle biopsy. Both came back the same way. The diagnosis was a mutation on the RYR1 gene. The RYR1 gene controls how calcium is released inside muscle cells. Calcium release is what tells a muscle to contract. In someone with this mutation, the regulator is broken. Under the wrong trigger, extreme exertion, sudden temperature change, certain anesthetic drugs, the muscle doesn't just cramp. It contracts until it tears itself apart and floods the bloodstream with its own proteins. That flood is called rhabdomyolysis. The proteins overwhelm the kidneys. Body temperature climbs. Heart rhythm destabilizes. Organs start to fail. In severe untreated episodes, it kills people. Roughly 1 in 1,000 people carry a genetic predisposition to it. Most go their entire lives without knowing, because the most common trigger is general anesthesia. Patients are typically diagnosed only after a near-fatal reaction during surgery. Hodgson's case was unusual. His triggers were the exact things his job required of him every day. Sustained exertion, going from a hot locker room to cold ice, repeated impact. Every cramp he'd had as a teenager, every back injury that wouldn't respond to rest, every blackout in Buffalo, every test for cancer came back negative. All of it had one source. In his own words, describing the final months before the diagnosis, "I'd bend over and the muscles would tear. It got pretty scary at the end, to tell you the truth." Riazi prescribed dantrolene. It works by suppressing the calcium release that drives the reactions. It controls the symptoms. It also produces drowsiness severe enough that competing in professional hockey on it is not realistic. Then she gave him the rest of the protocol. Avoid prolonged physical exertion. Avoid contact sports. Avoid rapid temperature changes. There was no version of his career that survived the diagnosis. Every season he had pushed through had been damaging him in ways that nobody could see. The verdict the public had reached, soft, injury-prone, lazy, lacking compete level, had been the visible surface of a genetic disorder that, on the wrong night, could have killed him on the ice. On October 3rd, 2016, at 26 years old, Cody Hodgson retired from professional hockey. For most stories like this, that would have been the end. It wasn't. For 8 years, the gear stayed in storage. Hodgson moved to Nashville with his family and took a role with the Predators in youth development. He went public with the diagnosis a year after retiring and partnered with the RYR1 Foundation on a documentary released in 2018. The hockey part of his life was finished. He had made peace with that. Then, around 2023, something his doctors couldn't fully explain began to happen. His symptoms started easing. The cramps, the breathing issues, the cardiac episodes, they receded, even as he reduced his dantrolene dose. He went back to the same specialists who had told him in 2016 that playing professional hockey could kill him. They ran the tests again. They cleared him to play. On January 13th, 2024, Elliot Friedman reported that a comeback was on the table. 4 days later, the Milwaukee Admirals signed Hodgson to a professional tryout. He was 33 years old. He had not played a competitive game since 2016. January 24th, 2024. First game back, he broke a rib in the first period. He kept playing. It took him a few weeks to find the net. On February 22nd, in a 4-0 win, he scored his first goal in 8 years. And he scored it against the Chicago Wolves. Then, he scored in the next game, and the one after that. 4 straight games with goals, including a 2-goal night against the Rockford Ice Hogs on March 1st. The president of the RYR1 Foundation said publicly that he was unaware of any other professional athlete with this severity of diagnosis ever returning to competition. The foundation began discussing a medical case report. There was no precedent for what Hodgson was doing. He played 13 games in total before ending his playing career for good. But the comeback was never really about the comeback. After his first goal in Chicago, Hodgson stayed at the rink after the game. He had been told there was a young girl in the arena who carried a different form of the RYR1 related disease. He found her. He signed a puck for her and gave it to her in person. He had been doing this kind of thing for years, quietly sharing his cell number with other patients living with the same gene, taking calls from parents whose kids had just been diagnosed, showing up for people who had been told their bodies couldn't compete. The career the public had filed under bust turned out to be something else. Not a failed pick, not a malingerer, a proof of concept. Evidence for one young girl in Chicago, for the families who called him, for a foundation now writing him into the medical literature that an RYR1 diagnosis was not the end of what a body could do. The verdict the sport had reached on him was wrong about the player. It was also wrong about the person. The medical system finally saw what no coach or front office ever could. A mutation written into him at birth, decoded by a single specialist who thought to look. Hodgson didn't get those years back, but he walked out with something the sport never gave him, an answer. What would you have done in his shoes? Kept fighting for a verdict, or let the silence stand? Drop your take in the comments, and if this story landed for you, a super thanks goes a long way in keeping these deep dives alive. And please subscribe before you go. The next one pulls back the curtain on something most people never saw coming.